Welcome, everyone.
Good
nice
morning.
To see you all here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Maybe while everybody's drifting in, you could just type where you are in the world, wherever you are in the world right now, just type that into the chat window so we can get a chance to see the geographical distribution.
Yes, we are both in Lausanne, right, Mike?
I'm not. It looks like from my background that
yes.
I'm an IMD, but I'm not. I'm actually in Spain at the moment.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm in Lausanne. I'm on campus. Beautiful day here, sunny. I hope it's the same for you on a beautiful Friday. Hi to Malaysia, Czech Republic, Spain. Great. Welcome, everyone. So today we are talking about corporate digital responsibility. Wow, that's beautiful, Mike. That's beautiful background. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Shall we get started? Yes. And as we are doing this, just a quick note that we want to make this as interactive as possible. And that means we have some polls for you. And we'll also several times ask you to, share your comments on the chat screen. We are keeping an eye on that. So please do jump in, do share your experiences, your comments. And of course, we'll also do our best to have some time for your questions at the end of the webinar. We are talking about best practices in corporate digital responsibility today, but we wanted to focus on maybe, let's say, seeming tensions, right? When we talk to organizations, sometimes we hear these seemingly contradicting purposes, let's say, around CDR. And of course, digital ethics or corporate digital responsibility is such a new topic that is still developing, still evolving very quickly for organizations. So we wanted to share these tensions with you and also hear what you think about these things, right? But of course, we will start with laying out the basics just to make sure that we are all on the same page. And before Mike does that, I have two scenarios for you that I think are very good examples that illustrates what do we mean? What is the, let's say, problem space when we say digital ethics or corporate digital responsibility? So here is the first one. Please use chat for this. Type your one-word reaction. How would you feel about this? Or would you be concerned if your local council, your local government authority decides to use drones to check whether citizens are making home improvements without necessary planning, consents, and permits? What do you think? Are there any alarm bells ringing, or do you think, oh, this could actually be a very good use of resources? We would be very efficient doing this. What is your one-word reaction to this? No. It's a big no, several of you. It depends. Many of you seem to say it's not acceptable. It's too intrusive. But there could be good sides to it as well, right? Can we find good sides to this? Saving our resources, being very effective, using also satellite technology. Suspicious, right? How about the other one? Imagine this time a retailer. A retailer is testing a system that detects demographics as a customer walks past by their window. And by detecting these demographics, they can display targeted advertising based on whichever demographic you would fall into, right? And in their early testing, they see that this leads indeed to a large uplift in store footfall. So people do like maybe these advertisements and they do walk into the store. How about this one? What is your one-word reaction to this?
So clearly, Öykü, people did not like the first one. The drone one was absolutely not popular at all. Let's see if this is any different.
The word intrusive popped up quite a few times with the drones example. How about this one?
We're seeing a little bit more positive on this one.
This could be acceptable, it seems. So you see, it's never black or white, right? It will depend on how the technology is used, how clearly the purpose is communicated, how transparent the processes are, and whether consumers know what's in it for them about this, right? So these are really good. Well, these are not real yet very realistic scenarios that fall under the problem space of corporate digital responsibility and digital ethics.
Right, and the second example there, you know, the retail, you walk past a store, you get a push notification on your phone. Of course, this is happening all the time online. Right? Forget about walking past a store. You just go to a website, and of course, you're getting targeted by advertising everywhere you go online. And so we're getting more and more used to that. But should we be getting used to that? You know, should we accept that that's okay? Should we accept that a drone looking into your backyard to see if you've done any construction is okay? And by the way, this is happening in many places at the moment. It is happening.
Yes.
So the question is, you know, what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and as organizations, what should we be doing about it? How should we be reacting? And I think that the background here of this whole session, this whole topic, in fact, is that we've had these two mega trends that have been really dominating not just the business landscape, but the overall, you know, the overall world landscape over the last decade. And one of them is digitization, as we're seeing more and more digital tools and technologies impacting our lives. And the other one is ethics and sustainability, right? What are we doing to our planet? What are the right and wrong ways of acting? And these two have been really dominant, and yet there have been very few points of intersection between them. Why? Because the digitization topic deals with the virtual world. It deals with the world of bits and bytes, whereas the topic of ethics and sustainability largely deals with the physical world. You know, global heating, deforestation, you know, all these kinds of questions. So you haven't seen a lot of intersections, but we feel that this is changing. That we're now starting to see, because they're so big, these mega trends are so big and powerful, there's inevitable you're going to have intersection. So what does that intersection look like, and how should we react to it as organizations? And then that's what we want to play with today. And if we look to take it in terms of a plastic bottle, right? I mean, a plastic bottle is a physical thing. It didn't start its life as a plastic bottle. It started its life off as oil underneath the ground or underneath, you know, the ocean. It gets pulled up out of the ocean. It gets refined, and then eventually it gets made into pellets, plastic pellets that then are made into different types of products, including bottles. So some of those plastic pellets turn into bottles. Those bottles get sent to factories where they get filled with liquid. Then it gets transported to a store where it's bought, consumed, hopefully recycled, and eventually discarded. So this is kind of the life cycle of a plastic bottle, but we can see exactly the same thing happening with data, right? And in every step along the way, there are questionable issues about responsible practices, right? So you know, data doesn't start underneath the ground. It starts with a social media post, a transaction, you know, or you know, whatever, a letter, you know, and any kind of digital asset that then gets collected and then often made into not pellets like plastic, but you know, gets divided in particular fields, right? The particular bits of data, parts of data, which then get recombined, productized, sold, recycled, and eventually discarded. And along that whole chain, you have issues around ethics and responsibility. Was that data collected with permission? Was it changed? Is it accurate? Did you check the accuracy? When it was combined, is it combined in a way that the authorization of the originators of that information? Is it remain accurate? Is it recycled? When it's supposed to be destroyed, is it actually destroyed? Any money that's made from that data when it's packaged and sold, is some of that value returned to the originators of the data. So as you can see, there's a lot of parallels between the lifespan of a plastic bottle and the lifespan of data, and there's lots of ethical issues that happen all the way along that chain. And this is where we come to what we're starting to call corporate digital responsibility, right? Which is this subject of, we've all heard of corporate social responsibility, but the digital version of that we call corporate digital responsibility. And we define that as follows, right? We have a pretty clear definition of that. We define it as a set of practices and behaviors that help an organization to use digital and data and digital technologies in a way that is socially, economically, technically, and environmentally responsible. So all these four things. So if we look at those four things, we break them down a little bit. We see they kind of flow into different categories. On the social side, we have a lot of issues around, data protection, digital diversity, digital inclusion, which are extremely big topics at the moment, and rightly so. And basically social ethical practices around data and digital technologies. Then we have the economic side. Value is created. How is that value shared? Is it shared in a responsible way? Are we dehumanizing the type of jobs? The whole thing with Amazon, right? Happening this week, if you've been keeping touch, what's going on this week, Amazon in California, there's new laws that are restricting what Amazon can do with AI, and how their employees are being monitored in the work that they do. I think in this economic category, there's also issues about piracy, so copyright protection, who owns data, and so forth. Then we have the technological section of CDR, which deals with the actual fundamental characteristics of technologies themselves. The algorithms, have they been built in a responsible way? Does your AI algorithm that recommends something, is it biased in a way that's discriminatory? I think these are all really important technical issues that link to responsible or not responsible practices. Data validation, data disposal, cybersecurity, all these questions fit here. And then finally, you have the environmental category. When you have equipment, is it being disposed in an environmentally responsible way? What about all that power being used, all those Bitcoin miners using all that power? Can you extend the lifespan of a phone from 2 to 3 years? It makes a massive difference, right, to the environmental footprint created by digital technology. So there's all these four, different elements that create this topic of corporate digital responsibility. So if we ask you,
yes,
how are you managing it? What would you say?
Let me launch a poll.
All right. So we just described what it is. How are you guys in your organizations? How are you dealing with this? Right? Are you dealing with this? Are you dealing with it at all? Is it being managed at all? If it is being managed, is it being managed in a coordinated manner or a fragmented manner? So we'll give you a few seconds to answer this, and then we'll see where we come out. Right, Öykü?
Yeah, and we have been hearing there are many initiatives, like in organizations, these 4 dimensions that Mike described, right, can be seemingly also disparate in organizations. There are a couple that are really doing an overall job by making it very centralized, but and some very good examples as well, which we'd like to maybe share later on, but there are not many, right? So I'm also looking at the results, which let me share quickly those results with you. As you can see, it seems that even if it's managed in a fragmented way. It seems to be the majority of you thinking there's still a significant portion that says we don't manage this at all, or 1/4 of you say it's managed in a coordinated manner. We really would like to hear from you on this, right? If you say we really have been working on this, we really would like to hear how you're going about this. We think there are some interesting and critical three key questions when it comes to dealing with corporate digital responsibility. So the first one, understanding the why behind your corporate digital responsibility initiatives. Why are you doing it? Are you motivated because of the regulatory environment you operate in? Or would you say that it is really part of your identity as an organization? The second critical decision is, what exactly are you doing? Are you really doing the minimum in a way that so it's just enough, right? Or are you thinking that, well, this is going to become even more important later on, so I'm going to do as much as I can, right? And the third question is, how are you doing it? So coming back to your results, right? We do see a distribution here. Do you have a central unit? Should you have a central unit that's really dealing with this? Or is it better to decentralize this and kind of distribute the power in the organization? So let's start discussing these questions, right? So Mike, what do you think the question one answer to this should be? Should it be purpose-driven CDR? Should it be purpose-driven, or should it be driven by compliance?
Right, and we're each going to take a side on here, just for the sake of the argument. We're each going to take a side, and then you get to vote on which one you agree with, and then we're going to share our suggested approach. There's a question before I get to that in the chat. It's from Mia. Is it possible to receive the presentation? The answer, Mia, is yes. We will be sharing this presentation material with you. You'll get it after the session. So if you want to share it with people in your organization, then please feel free to do so. All right. Why are you doing it? Should it be compliance driven or purpose driven? So listen, if you want to make it compliance driven, go ahead. But then it'll just become like something you have to do, that you have no passion to do it, you have no feeling about it. It's just something, and as soon as it falls through the cracks, it's gone, right? CDR has to be driven primarily by purpose. People need to believe in it. If it doesn't have a strong purpose behind it, people are just not going to listen. Honestly, they're not going to care. It's not going to work. This is not something that you can just box check. Oh yeah, we've dealt with that. It has to be driven fundamentally by mission and purpose of the organization. It has to be communicated very, very clearly, so people, when they're not sure, will do the responsible thing. And if you just take a compliance approach, you're not going to get anywhere close to that. You're going to get a bunch of box checkers who are just doing things to cover themselves, not because it's the right and responsible thing to do. CDR has to be driven by purpose.
Well, I think having a purpose is all great, right? But I think we should really get realistic here. Let's just take a very recent example. I'm sure you've heard about the controversy with, again, Facebook and Instagram. Apparently, Facebook internal research group has already known for a while that of the negative psychological impacts of Instagram on young people. And they did not share it. They even downplayed it when it comes to releasing the results to public. So Facebook has the purpose of growth, right? So if we don't regulate these initiatives, this is what happens. Regulations are there to tell us what are the constraints of the environment that we are working in. So regulations should be the compass when it comes to creating these corporate digital responsibility initiatives organizations. And take a look at GDPR. That's the perfect example. Everybody complained about GDPR. People hated GDPR because it creates these limitations. But today, after 3 years, we know that it's effective. We know there was a Cisco research that found a correlation between GDPR compliant businesses and lower rates of data breaches. So regulations work. We do need them as the compass so that we can arrange our initiatives around these. So basically, CDR should be, I think, compliance-driven. So of course, we wonder what you think. Here is my second poll for you. I'm just launching it. Tell us what you think. Would you plan your initiatives around your organization's purpose? Or would you plan those initiatives around what the compliance expects you to do or expects you to not to do? Okay.
What are we looking at?
Well, Mike, it seems purpose-driven seems to take the lead here, but there are even answers to other. We wonder, what is that other? Could you please type in chat, what should be the way? In the meantime, maybe we can share what we think, right?
It's interesting, right? That you got, it's not, there's quite a split there.
Yeah.
Just over 50% said purpose, but there's quite a few of you, 30% said compliance driven, and then a few of you said other, right? Yeah. So if you do have if you're in the other category and you have a slightly different point of view, feel free to type that into the chat. I see Lori there, combination of the two, which is actually, Öykü, it's pretty close to where we come down, right?
Exactly. We talk about finding a middle ground, right? We say adopting a principle approach is a great way to start. Trust your purpose, but verify with regulations, because indeed you don't want to go beyond, let's say, the regulatory framework. So that's definitely there. Having an eye on regulations is a smart thing to do. And of course, like in every environment, when it comes to technology, regulations play a catch-up game, really, a cat and mouse game. They develop much slower than the technology itself. So there are a lot of movement now in this area after GDPR. Now, I'm sure you've heard about the AI regulations, for instance, in Europe. So there's a lot of movement in the area. We should keep an eye on this, but of course, we should also make this align with the purpose, with the identity of organizations. And measuring this also is very important. Can you align the incentives in the organization with those responsible behaviors that you expect, right? This may relate to cybersecurity related secure behavior, or ethical and privacy preserving data management practices, digital diversity and inclusion, responsible technology development, and getting rid of all technologies also in a responsible manner. These are all things, if you expect such behaviors, then aligning the incentives in the organization will be very important to making this a sustainable initiative in the organization. So let's get on with the second critical question that we think should be answered around CDR initiatives, and which comes down to reactive versus proactive. What do you think, Mike?
Right. So I'll take the reactive position because I think trying to be proactive when it comes to CDR is like trying to navigate on Mars, right? I mean, you have no idea. It's a completely foreign type of environment. As you said, Öykü, regulations are changing so quickly. So, trying to be proactive and guess how things are going to be in the future, you're just going to be wrong, right? You're just not going to be able to get it right. So the best thing to do is to be reactive, but fast, right? So basically you do what you need to do. You understand what the regulations are and be ready. So as soon as those regulations change, you're ready to change with them, right? So it's reactive, but at the same time being fast and agile. Because if you try and be proactive, you try and guess what the future is going to be like, you're probably going to be wrong. And if you're wrong in the wrong direction, that's going to be a big problem because you're not ready to follow the rules, right? You're not ready to follow the rules when they come out. So I think, being proactive on the one hand is, aspirationally, yeah, definitely we should try and do that. But the reality is, let's get real. You need to be super fast and reactive. Do what you need to do today, be ready. And when the change comes, change along with it, right? Because we are going to be, judged by the ethical considerations of the future, right? So we need to be reactive today.
Yet, Mike, I think when we look around, we see what happens of the organizations that are reactive. Let me just give one example. Think about all the things we hear on facial recognition systems, right? Especially during the pandemic, many exams were conducted online, and there were many people that were not allowed in exams because the facial recognition system just did not recognize them. Or think from a law enforcement perspective. I read so many news articles of individuals being arrested wrongly because the facial recognition system matched their face with somebody else's face. So clearly, all these algorithms, these machine learning algorithms do not yet work so well due to the data that was used to train them. That data was full of biases, that was incomplete, not representative. And because these organizations were not proactive, we ended up all these controversies. So if you don't want to be part of a controversy, if you don't want your reputation to plummet, and if you're using data-driven initiatives like AI and machine learning in the organization, you need to be proactive. Otherwise, you will be part of another AI gone wrong scenario here. We need to think ahead. These things have a lot of input on, or let's say influence on the reputation of the organization. So we need practices that put privacy by design in the center, security by design, digital ethics by design. These things should be implemented by design. They should be built in proactively rather than bolt on afterwards when something goes wrong. So CDR initiatives should be proactive.
Tricky
what
one.
Do you think?
Tricky one.
So what do you think?
What's your point of view on this? Do you think proactive approach is good, makes sense, a reactive approach, or do you think something else? Which do you think makes the most sense?
Is there another other here as well? Let's see. Well, it seems, Mike, this time proactivity slightly seemed to take the lead. So over preparation, and there's even less of the group that says others. And I'm looking at the chat. Maybe it's like Tracy says, maybe it's good to start by compliance and then work towards the purpose, right? So there might be like in between. Is it like same here when it comes to proactive versus reactive? Reactive for compliance, proactive for purpose-driven. That's an interesting comment.
Right. So so Donnell there is making a link between the why and the what, which I think is pretty smart, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have one single approach. We're kind of pushing you into these extremes here.
Yeah.
But the reality is that you don't need to be one of those extremes. I see Stefano here as a pro-reactive.
Pro-reactive.
Pro-reactive. It sounds like a something you would take, if you're feeling sick, if you have hay fever, just take. I'm going to take a proactive, pro-reactive. Anyway, good word. Stefano, I like it too, pro-reactive. Let's be pro-reactive. And in fact, when we think about what our suggested approach is, it's kind of a pro-reactive approach, right? And that I think being proactive, you have to try and anticipate the changes that are going to happen, because we will be judged by the ethical norms of the future. And so it's not just enough to just follow the rules today, because it's, we see those, I don't know, you remember in the Me Too movement, and the Black Lives Matter movements, we had statues of Christopher Columbus, with a head cut off.
Yeah.
Right. And so even these sort of icons that were heroes at a certain time are villains later, and the same thing can happen with organizations. So I think just being reactive is not going to be enough. You have to try and anticipate and consider. And as Öykü said, build those kind of privacy and responsibility by design principles into your organization. But at the same time, you can't just be looking ahead. I mean, you have to react to what's going on now. And the landscape changes very quickly and unpredictably, because these regulators sometimes do weird stuff. And we have to deal with that. So, being able to be pro-reactive, to take Stefano's term, I think is important. Act quickly, move quickly, anticipate, be proactive, but also be ready to move quickly, which, by the way, means that you need to have agile systems and processes and ways of working in order for that to happen. All right. So
let's get to the final one.
Let's do that. And the final one, am I starting this one, Öykü? I think
yes.
I am, right? So here's kind of governance, right? So practically speaking, how do you actually make it happen in your organization? Many of you said it's fragmented, right? So we have this, should we centralize it or should we decentralize it, right? Centralize or decentralize. I'm going to take the centralization position. All right, so generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of centralizing things. I mean, I understand, the danger is you create some kind of team that nobody cares about because it's centralized. However, in the case of corporate digital responsibility, I think if you don't centralize it, you end up with everybody kind of doing it in their own way, doing their own thing in their own way, right? It becomes chaos. It becomes extremely fragmented. And from an organizational point of view, it becomes a minefield of risk. Because if you don't have some kind of central body coordinating responsible practices around digital, you could have cybersecurity incidents over here because they're not complying. You could have digital diversity and inclusion issues over there. You could have privacy issues. You could have all kinds of issues because you're not centrally managing or controlling it. So maybe eventually, once you've got a handle on this in your organization, you can devolve and empower and decentralize. But I think in the short term, most organizations have to take a kind of a centralized approach to this, at least to get a portfolio view, see all the things that are happening, and put in some, practices, rules, incentives, structures around what's happening around digital responsible practices. Because if not, it's going to be a minefield. I tell you, it's not going to work. Centralization does not mean bureaucratic. You can do it in a way that's not overly bureaucratic. But unless you centralize, I think it's just going to be chaos. You're going to miss opportunities and you're going to have a lot of threats.
I think decentralized would work much better for CDR, Mike, because think about the 4 dimensions you talked about. They are seemingly so can move along without feeding into each other, right? And like you said, if it's centralized, the likelihood of turning into a clunky bureaucratic machine is very, very, very high. Think about blockchain. People love blockchain. Why? Because it decentralizes trust. When you trust your business units to take their initiatives on, you give power to people. So they actually are, they do take initiative and they own that initiative and accountability around it. This way, it's also much more a quicker decision-making, no bureaucracy, much more efficient communication, easier execution of the initiatives, better supervision of control, and let's face it, also relief on executives, right? I mean, their plates are already full, so this will be yet a lone trend, like you were saying, coming, that they will have to carry the flag in the organization. Decentralizing this would distribute not only that trust, but would also distribute power, and people would be much more involved in the initiatives that take forward, and things would move faster. Hence, you would have bigger impact much quicker. So I think it should be decentralized.
All right.
What do you think?
You've heard both positions. Now, what's your point of view?
And there is a clear winner, Mike. There
is? I can't see it, but I'm quite curious.
It seems that centralization is favored. A significant portion of you think it should be centralized. And I'm here looking at the chat. Centralized so that you can align with together, but the action should be decentralized. Depends on the nature of the organization.
Sure.
As you can imagine, I think, let me stop sharing it here. I think there is a middle way that can be found here, right? So maybe following a hybrid approach can be one way to go here, which also seems that what you have in mind in the chat. Building a central team could be very beneficial because then you have this center for collective expertise in the organization. These are your facilitators, your advisors, your trainers that you can send to other parts of the organization, and they will be there to provide the central guidelines. You will have your principles to follow, right? But then different units will have their movement of freedom or freedom of movement to take their own initiatives further. I think one other interesting concept that can be considered is hiring in or getting in external expertise. We do hear several organizations that are using ethical boards, for instance. Some members of these boards are from the organization, but some other members are from outside the organizations. Sometimes there's a very clear choice to bring in someone who is not familiar with the business, who has a more ethical hat, philosophical hat, to really take a look at the initiatives from this ethics perspective without getting involved in the dynamics of the business or the industry itself. So this could be a good option to bring in fresh perspective into the organization.
I think that makes sense. There's a couple of good comments in the chat, right, from Lori and Pedro. Lori, you're in Florida, right? It's early. We appreciate you joining us at this very, very early hour. Hopefully you have a coffee in your hand as you're watching this. But yeah, and I think you're both right. You know, that some kind of a combination for most organizations makes sense. You know, centralize, set the course. I like the way you put that. Decentralizations, execute, right? So I think that probably, as long as there's some kind of clear governance around that, that can be potentially quite effective. Yeah.
So these were the three critical questions that we wanted to discuss, but we also wanted to share a good example, right? There are, as we already shared, there are some examples of out there that are doing a good job in this case. But again, let me repeat, please, if you think your organization's initiatives are also have reached quite a maturity level, please let us know, because we would like to really hear more examples. But we wanted to share one with you.
Right, and unfortunately, there aren't too many. You know, we're in the field. We're spending a lot of time talking to executives and companies about this topic, and what we find is that, you know, if they're thinking about it at all, it's only in a very, very fragmented way, right? So you've got, you know, one team. You know, maybe it's I don't know, the legal department looking at privacy. You've got the IT department looking at cybersecurity. You've got the HR department discussing diversity and inclusion. You've got, you know, the economic folk, maybe the commercial side looking at the economic value. You've got the developers. So it's happening, but it's happening in a very, very fragmented way. And so it's hard actually to find examples of companies that have really taken this seriously. And this is one of them. Can you guess which company it is? Okay, so they have something they've called a decency quotient. And a big piece of this decency quotient, by the way, is their approach to using data, information, and technology. It's a big approach, this decency quotient. So the decency quotient defines, and if you know who this is, or you want to guess, just put it in the chat. Write it in the chat. Okay, our decency quotient defines the status of our civilization. Your DQ, this is not Dairy Queen, this is decency quotient, will determine how well you do in your life, not your IQ. Any thought?
Here's a guess. Amazon.
Amazon, Bogdan, is a good guess. Not correct. It's not correct, but it's not a bad guess. MasterCard, Winnie, well done. Gonna give you a big thumbs up there, Winnie. There you go. You get the big thumbs up. Congratulations. Winnie gets it right. It is MasterCard, and you can probably see a little bit by the branding there. And they've taken this quite seriously. And a lot of companies have principles, right? I mean, maybe your company also has a set of principles around, you know, responsible practice principles. The danger is, or not the danger, but the reality is that in many cases, those principles don't translate down into practices. So yes, you have the principles and they look great on a PowerPoint or in the annual report, but do they actually influence how things are being done way down in the organization? So if you're faced with a decision way down in the organization, are those principles going to help guide you to go left or right? You know, that's basically the challenge. How do you translate corporate digital responsibility, all those, you know, things we talked about, from principles into practice? So MasterCard has a bunch of principles, right? So principles are 6 of them around security and privacy, transparency, control, and so on and so forth. That's great. But they also spend a lot of time and energy taking those principles and translating into what it really means in processes, practices, ways of working, incentives. And so from data, so just looking at data, they set out 4 very, very clear rules that they follow. So they have to build their systems landscape around this, their process landscape. They have to build it all around this. So first thing, you own it. So all the data that they have about you, they don't own it. They're custodians of it, but you own it. You control it, which, by the way, now means that, you know, if you ask them to erase it, they erase it, right? So they have to have in place those systems that allow you to do that. So you own it, you control it. You should benefit from the use of it. Meaning if they extract value from it, right, that they want your data to make your life richer and easier. Richer meaning if they sell it, then you should get something of that. You should get some of that return. And finally, we protect it. So their job is to protect your data. Now, if you're a MasterCard customer, you may say, well, I don't feel any of that. I don't know if I get any of that, but at least that's their aspiration. That's what they're trying to do. And I think there's an interesting, you know, an outcome of that. So it becomes, as we talked about before, quite purpose-driven. So it's really this kind of decency quotient idea. These principles and practices become very much embedded in the way they do things. And so you get these kind of ideas that develop that maybe wouldn't have developed otherwise, but do develop because of this, you know, approach that MasterCard has taken. And one of them is this idea of data philanthropy. This is kind of a new concept. You know, when they were looking at, when MasterCard was looking at, you know, working with philanthropy, so with charities, they noticed that, you know, charities are really bad with data. So they don't have a lot of data. They very old-fashioned in how they use data to raise funds or provide services to their customers. They don't have a lot of data and they're not very good at using data. So they thought, well, we have data and we're good at using data. So maybe we could provide data to the charities, of course, in a privacy compliant, anonymized way. We could provide them with data and we could help them to extract the value from that data. So they don't have to waste a lot of time and energy and money doing fundraising or providing services that's unnecessary. So they set up a program for providing data and advice on how to use the data for charities, which has now become kind of a key component of their philanthropic approach as a company. So, you know, and then so that's just one thing, and then there's more, right? Öykü?
Yeah, exactly. From a purposeful data use perspective, Mike, I even heard them deciding against investing in a startup because when the data that is being generated or collected in the startup combined in the internal systems of MasterCard, it would risk the anonymity of the data MasterCard so highly values. So they even decided against doing that. So it's really something on their mind all the time. And they have created this AI governance framework, which is led by 4 executives at MasterCard. So their chief privacy officer, their chief data officer, the VP of AI, and their chief cyber officer, all really together think about, you know, their AI initiatives. We have a new idea. Let's evaluate the purpose. What do we want to accomplish with this new AI initiative that we have, for instance, in the organization? And then they say, well, okay, our purpose is fine. It does not potentially discriminate against any other subpopulation. It looks decent enough. Let's look at the data that we would need to use for these initiatives. Let's evaluate it. Do we already have it? Do we need to collect it? If we do so, can we still guarantee all those principles that we have? Can we still guarantee that we'll create value by using this data in the organization? Then they focus on use case evaluations and their model of their data model design. So here they really worry about biases in algorithm creation and ensure that they detect those biases before such an algorithm is deployed out there. And then they have an internal risk scoring system that also goes through these executives and say, how do we evaluate the risk of this model? If we deploy this, can anything go wrong, really? So very here actually being quite proactive before they deploy this out in the market. And they look into the impact assessment. So this is very similar to the privacy impact assessment concept from GDPR. So they say, well, let's test this out. Let's go through a privacy impact assessment to ensure we're not missing anything. And finally, even before it's totally put out in the wild, it's monitored and audited frequently. So they go through this with every new AI initiative they invest in the organization.
And I think Bogdan asked a question in the chat, right? How can they guarantee the fourth one, which was we protect it, right? The data. Yeah. And the truth is they can't guarantee it, and nobody can. I mean, thankfully, we haven't seen data spills or cybersecurity incidents with MasterCard, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to be there in the future. I think what we're saying is that you can reduce the likelihood if you really have everything set from principles all the way down to practices. And you can see that MasterCard, they put a lot of energy into this. They put a lot of time, a lot of thinking, a lot of resources behind it. They really take it seriously, and that's probably what you need to do as an organization in order to achieve the objectives of being CDR compliant. And unfortunately, a lot of companies if they're doing it at all, they're doing it, as we said, in a very fragmented manner. So I think there's a few questions. Maybe I guess we're getting toward the end of the session, but one of them is ask yourself, the questions to ask yourself about your maturity, right? How good are we, right? How advanced are we when it comes to these types of practice? Do you have a good sense of where you are compared to your competitors or customers, or where you think you should be? Has it been measured? Have you assessed it? Have you benchmarked yourself on all these things? And if you haven't, it's something you should probably think about. And it's not just about avoiding threats. It's also about taking opportunities. So I think we're seeing a lot more demand from the consumer side for responsible practices from the companies they work with. So there's an opportunity as well. It used to always be, okay, well, how do we avoid a cyber incident? Well, fine. But also, how can we potentially capture new customers because of the way we're doing things in a responsible manner? And Öykü, governance.
Yes, governance. It's all about how do you organize internally, right? We started as it comes down to also the ethics boards that I had briefly mentioned. Some organizations may prefer having a chief ethics officer, for instance, or hiring an ethics board externally or internally, creating a council so that you go through these challenging situations in the organization. And you would need also these champions in the organization that would lead these initiatives, because even the discussion, just also looking by the MasterCard case, we can see that this does require cross-functional collaboration, right? There is regulation in place. There's clearly data science that needs to be involved. IT needs to be involved if you want to take security into perspective. So there is a cross-functional collaboration is necessary for the success of these initiatives.
Right, and that doesn't always happen. I remember having a conversation just a few weeks ago with the chief sustainability officer of a very, very big multinational consumer goods company, and asking about, what are you doing about, on the digital side, digital sustainability? And he said, nothing. I mean, he kind of looked at me blankly and says, well, I deal with reducing packaging. That's it's not even on the agenda there of the sustainability group, which was a big, powerful group in that organization. So I mean, the governance needs to be looked at, and then processes as well. So I think these things need to be considered when developing new processes, when adapting existing processes, when digitizing processes. How can you get kind of responsible by design elements into the processes so that you don't have things falling through the cracks? There's a check and balance around what you should or shouldn't be doing when it comes to digital responsibility baked into each process step.
Mm-hmm. And finally, the culture, of course, these should be embedded in the company culture. So this, I think, links also the purpose discussion we had, right? So when people believe in the importance of this, then things move much smoothly and they do contribute much more significantly. So if they believe in the ethical implications of, for instance, data use and machine learning, and believe in the proactive detection of bias and de-biasing these applications, if this is a belief that your employees have, then of course the initiatives would be much more, would come much more naturally to them. So areas like privacy, security, digital inclusion and diversity, and responsible technology use are mostly linked to compliance and risk mitigation in the organization. But I think organizations should also see that these are also value creators. Like Mike said, these could be new areas of new customer development areas, because we do see globally the shift in customer trust. There is a significant drop in consumer trust, especially towards digital companies. So we do believe that these concepts will become more and more important when it comes to winning customers over.
So we're like 5 minutes from the top of the hour here. We're kind of running low on time. We wanted to see if, you know, a chance for any of you have comments you want to share, experiences that you want to share, perspectives that you have, questions that you may have. I mean, please jump in. We feel this is a wave, right? I mean, we felt it 7 years ago with digital transformation, right? It was a wave, it was growing, and we felt this is going to be big. And we feel the same way here, that this is something it's not mature yet, you know, but it's going to build, it's going to get more mature. And I think it's a good time now for organizations to start focusing on it and taking it a lot more seriously, not just because of the threat, but also because of the opportunity.
Yeah, Mike, there's a very interesting comment from Bogdan. He's saying that, well, also, I guess CDR should also need to be reported as part of sustainability reporting. Absolutely. This reminds me of, there's a startup called Sidot in Finland. And Sidot's founder took the time to go through all major technology organizations, including Tesla, to do exactly what you said. She looked into their reports, year-end sustainability reports, to see, do they talk about, as a part of sustainability report, any of their digital initiatives? Do they talk about recycling technology? Do they talk about de-biasing, or you know, checking the data ethics? Are there any biases in the data that they have, or their machine learning algorithms? Even Tesla, an organization based so much on AI, right, did not have a word of it in the sustainability report. So this is, I completely agree with you. It should be there, but we are not there yet at all.
We're keeping track of it. I see Walid has a comment there. You know, we're trying to keep track of it. We're trying to build a library of interesting examples and case studies of companies and what they've done. It doesn't really exist at the moment. I say there's lots of stuff on principles, but very little on practices. I do empathize a little bit with Bogdan there, saying, yeah, you know what, is it just going to be another bureaucratic exercise that's, you know, another thing that small companies have to deal with beyond everything else? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully it's not, because then it just becomes, we talked about before, just a compliance exercise and becomes something that everybody loves to hate. It shouldn't be, right? I mean, it should be a way to be better and be more responsible without being bureaucratic. And whether we'll get to that balance, I don't know. But I think, again, being proactive is probably a good way to start. You start thinking about it right now. Exactly.
Maybe some key learnings, Mike. Maybe we can share a couple of high-level pointers. I think the message is, of course, like Mike said, we did play the extreme ends of a spectrum for each of these three questions, right? So, but just get started, however small your initiative would be. But of course, adopting a principled approach to CBR, but keeping an eye on the changing regulatory landscape, as we mentioned, is a smart way to go. It, of course, should be a part of your purpose.
Right, and you don't have to start from scratch, right? There are, you know, case studies and examples of what companies have done, you know, as far as setting it up and the governance, mixing the internal and the external. I think it's not a bad place, not a bad time to start right now. I think the pandemic has also accelerated a lot of this because a lot of more interactions internally and externally, so within a company, but also with customers, are technology mediated, which potentially uncovers a bunch of new responsible questions that have to be answered. So now is a pretty good time to be taking it up.
And there are several frameworks out there, by the way, if you want to focus on data debiasing, algorithm debiasing, such an active field since 2018, especially we see a lot of work, multidisciplinary work being done on these topics. So there are also things that you can go back to out there that you can start using in your organization. All right.
And let me just post, there's an article, I mean, Öykü and I are working on some stuff. There's an article that I wrote last year that kind of frames the challenge. So the link is there in the chat if anybody's interested in looking at it. But I think we're out of time, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for your interaction. Thank you so much for playing along with your contribution to the polls and the discussion. All
right, and stay tuned. This topic is not going away, so we're very interested to hear from you about what you're doing and the insights that you have. And we'll probably come back a little bit later when we've collected more data and have more insights. So thank you all for joining. It's been great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.